Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We're going to start our webinar in just a couple minutes, let a couple more people trickle in. So if you just hold tight and I will start in a minute. Good morning, everybody. We'll be starting in just a moment. Let a few more people get in. Thank you for coming today. All right, let's get started. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. My name is Alex Greenberg. I'm the Financial Program Specialist with the State Economic Development Department. Today, we're joined by representatives from Clifton Larson Allen, CLA, and Homewise, who will be part of our panel discussing community development opportunities in New Mexico Opportunity Zones. They're going to give a little bit of background and overview of the program and then get into some of the potential opportunities, considerations, and examples for New Mexico. This webinar is being live streamed, so feel free to submit any questions during the presentation. We're also recording this webinar and we'll send it out to everyone who has registered. Here's going to be a quick summary of the agenda today. We're going to go over some New Mexico Economic Development Department updates, talk about the roles on the recovery team and provide contact information. Then I'm going to pass it off to CLA and Ben Darwin, and then to Joanna Gilligan and Homewise. Finally, we'll conclude by going over some next steps and answering some questions. Like I said, please put your questions in the chat. I'll be compiling them and trying to record them throughout the presentation. For a brief EDD update, a reminder, our Cabinet Secretary is Alicia J. Keys and our Deputy Cabinet Secretary is John Clark. This is a map breaking down the economic development regions in the state, as well as the contact information for the respective regional reps. The EDD has several divisions and a comprehensive list of programs and resources on the website listed above. Please feel free to reach out to me or any of the regional reps if you have any questions or need additional information. This is the recovery team that was funded by a grant as part of the EDA CARES project. Jennifer Myers is our statewide recovery coordinator. She facilitates local business growth and economic recovery in local communities through direct outreach and coordination. Felicia DePaul is our program development specialist, helping to manage the 20-year state plan, as well as the rural efficient business program. Myself, I work mostly with the funded economic development pitch showcase and opportunity zones. And John Winscott, who splits his time between EDD and MNERD, is our economic and energy diversification coordinator, supporting renewable energy companies in New Mexico through recruitment, educational training, and facility degree and apprenticeship programs. Next up, we'll start with our panel. We'll be joined by Ben Darwin and Dominic Zamora, as well as John Henninger, depending on technical abilities. Well, I'll pass it off to Ben to start with.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate this opportunity to, for Way to be on the panel with the rest of you all. And Joanna, it's nice to meet you. And today is really about focusing on sort of maybe a three-part agenda. High level, we're going to cover some of the bases of the Opportunity Zone incentive, some of how it works and why people are looking at it, and some of the more important areas that you want to pay attention to. We're not going to do a deep dive technically. That's not really what the intent here is today. It's to stay high level and help people understand, how and what's actually happening in the marketplace. And so with that, if you'd advance the slide. Thank you, Alex. So the first thing I need to say is, this is not intended to be a presentation where you're receiving tax advice that you should run out and execute, actual transactions with. You're going to want to take some notes and make sure that you engage legal and tax advisors to help you with, with any strategy that you pursue related to the Opportunity Zone incentive. And so with that disclaimer, we'll go to the next page. So the Opportunity Zone Incentive, the statute was passed as part of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017, and it was that tax bill was actually passed very late in the year in 2017. And we've gone through, well, the idea behind it really was to create an incentive that would allow taxpayers who had capital gains locked up in various different investments to redeploy those capital gains in a tax beneficial way into areas around the country that represent low income communities. And so the idea was unlock, you know, the trillion or more dollars of capital gain that was in the stock market and other investments, provide a mechanism to redeploy that capital gain into low income communities. If you go to the next page, please. So Clifton Larson Allen, or as CLA, as we like to refer to ourselves, we are the 9th largest accounting firm in the US. Within our organization, we essentially go to market through 3 different business units. One is our accounting firm, which we're well known for, and it's sort of the traditional audit and tax services. Then we also have a wealth advisory practice, and then we have an outsourcing practice. And within our wealth advisory practice, one of the things that we help sponsors do is raise capital. And so we have a capital markets platform. And since the incentive has been out there and through the end of last year, we raised over $350 million for private equity investments into opportunity zones. We've also advised on a number, we also provide advisory services as it relates to our clients that are looking to sell or acquire businesses. Within our wealth advisory practice, we serve our clients as a registered investment advisor, and we also help clients in that vein identify how to defer their capital gain and through an opportunity zone investment on a relatively smaller scale than we might do on the capital markets platform. Within our outsourcing group, we provide what we refer to as fund services. And fund services is really about helping sponsors manage the investor reporting process that they have. And then we're well known for our accounting firm capabilities, which are the traditional audit, tax, and consulting services. Myself, I've done a lot of work in this space. I probably have, next slide, please, Alex, thanks. I've done a lot of work in this area. This next slide has got a lot going on, but it does sum up some of the things that we want people to pay attention to. So the first thing that it does is it summarizes the 3 benefits that exist for an investment into an opportunity zone. And those benefits are to defer income. Currently, you can still reduce the amount of gain that you'll be taxed on. And then ultimately, if you hold your investment over the 10-year plus time period and it appreciates, you can pay no tax on the gain associated with that investment. So we'll dive down into that a little bit. So the defer income, what that means is if you invest eligible gain dollars into an opportunity zone fund, then you will be allowed to defer the recognition of those gains until December 31st of 2026. The second benefit, well, let me make it clear. You get to defer them until December 31 of 2026, at which time you will recognize them. So we want to always make sure people understand they are going to pay tax on those gains. They are going to recognize those gains and need to plan for the payment of tax in 2026. Actually, they'd likely be paying the tax in 2027. So then the second benefit that we have through the end of this year is a reduction in the amount of tax that you might pay, and that comes from what we refer to as a 10% step up that applies for opportunity zone investments made through the end of 2021. And that's a statutory step up that applies to investments that are held for 5 or more years. And 2021 is the last year that 10% step up will occur. So we're expecting that there are going to be a fair number of people looking to make opportunity zone investments between now and the end of the year to be able to capitalize on this. Although we're going to talk about sort of, is this the tail wagging the dog? And how should you really look at that 10% step up in the overall context of a real estate investment? And then the last benefit is that to the extent that you hold your investment for 10 plus years and the investment appreciates, and you make an election after that 10-year period, then you'll pay no tax on the gain that's recognized at the time of the election. So let's see, a couple of other things on this slide. Nope, I think you can go ahead and turn the page. Thank you. So some updates. First of all, Novogradac tracks the theoretical investment in opportunity zone funds. The latest numbers that they presented to us is that in excess of $17.5 billion have been invested or committed to qualified opportunity zone funds. We'll talk about what that means, whether it, because when we think about funds, some of us think about large funds like, billion-dollar funds, and in reality, the way this incentive is structured, they use this phrase funds to mean both big and small funds. One of the things that was debated was whether or not the 2020 decennial census changes would change the census tracts. And there were a lot of people who were betting on sort of both sides of the answer to this question. Ultimately, Treasury came out and said they were not going to change the boundaries, and they stand as they were designated when the incentive was made into law. So we have certainty around that. Recently, as recent as August of 2021, we had some technical corrections. Those are important because they clarify some questions that were raised related to the regulations, the proposed regulations, and the statute as it relates to certain tests that these opportunity zone funds are subject to. I'm not going to dive into the weeds there, but they were helpful, and they provided us with some more clarity around how to apply the regulations. All right, next page, please. Okay, so this one is one of my favorites. So if you have a capital gain, then you have 180 days to invest that capital gain into a qualified opportunity zone fund if you want to defer that capital gain. The question that always comes up is, how do you count the 180 days? And while I don't have a slide on it, I'm going to tell you that there are essentially 4 things that you need to know. The first is that the 180 days includes the sale date. And most people do the math wrong. They take the sale date, they add 180 days to it, and they think that's the day they have to invest by, and that's not how it works. The 180 days includes the sale date. So you only add 179 days to your sale date. There are essentially 3 different ways you can measure that sale date. If you were the taxpayer that sold the asset, the 180 days is always going to be measured by the sale date of that asset. If you are a taxpayer that receives an allocation of gain from a pass-through entity, like a partnership, then you have 2 additional choices. You can elect to use the sale date of the pass-through entity or the partnership, the actual sale date. So that oftentimes gets used so that you can accelerate when you put money into an opportunity zone fund. Or you can choose to use the last day of the tax year of the pass-through entity. That would normally be, for a calendar year taxpayer, that would be December 31st. Or you can use the initial due date of the tax return for the pass-through entity, which for partnerships, that is March 15th. So you have a lot of choices depending on where your gain is originated, what kind of gain it is, and you're going to want to get your hands around that very, very early on, because what you don't want to do is have that 180-day clock close on you inadvertently So there may be some questions around that. We can circle back to it for sure, Alex. Why don't you go to the next page, please? All right, this question comes up frequently. Okay, should I accelerate my investment decisions around putting money into a QOF before the end of the year in light of this 10% step up and the fact that it's only available through the end of 2021? And this example might be a little hard to see. Essentially takes $1 million of gain that's invested. It assumes that tax rates are what they are today for both comparisons. And on $1 million investment, if you assume 0 state rate and the maximum capital gain rate, assuming this is long-term capital gains, the 10% deferral represents a deferral of income of $100,000, and the tax savings on that is 23.8, the tax rate times $100,000. What we advise clients is you don't want the tax tail to ever wag the dog, right? So a $23,000 or $24,000 savings, when you're talking about making $1 million investment decision, is probably not material over the life of how long you're going to have to hold this investment, right? Because remember, you're going to need to hold this investment for more than 10 years. So we want people to be cautious in terms of about rushing out to make investment decisions when it comes to this 10% step up. It does matter. In theory, you do save some tax, but relative to the overall investment, it may not be worth, the act of rushing. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so what can opportunity zones invest in? The most common asset that we see opportunity zones formed to invest in is real property. Real property must be original use or substantially improved. And those are two concepts that are very, very important to understand. You can make investments in operating businesses. We don't see this as frequently as we do in real estate. And the reason for that is that it's easy to see a piece of dirt that's on a census tract that qualifies and build something on it that's going to be leased out to tenants or used in your business. And so that concept passes the original use and the purchase requirements pretty easily. When you start to sort of peel back the onion and look at an operating business, it gets a little more challenging because you've got a number of what we refer to as tests that have to be met in order for that fund to be eligible for the incentive. One of the tests is that 90% of the assets that the fund holds has to be qualifying property. But part of that test is that it also has to generate gross income that's qualifying. And then there is a geography requirement that has to be met, meaning it has to be occurring within the opportunity zone census tract. So real property is easy to understand because it doesn't move. But businesses tend to have people and equipment and other items that move, which makes it more challenging to figure out how they qualify for the opportunity zone incentive. But the answer is that they definitely have. They designed the statute with the incentive or with the intent of having folks invest in operating businesses. All right, next slide, please. Okay, what can't you invest in? So what you can't have an opportunity zone business invest in are the so-called sin tax entities. So golf courses, country clubs, massage parlors, alcoholic sales businesses. Alex, you asked me the question about cannabis. Cannabis is not specifically on that list, but we would not advise you to run out and go set up an opportunity zone business designed to be in the cannabis industry, because that is a trade or business that is clearly not allowed for in terms of being deemed to be legal for federal purposes. It might be legal for state purposes, but at the federal level, it's not. And so while it's not specifically listed, we advise extreme caution in terms of pursuing an investment around that. Okay, next slide. All right, so we're gonna dive into a little bit of the structure, and we've got 2 slides to show you what the structure possibilities are for an opportunity zone fund and an opportunity zone business. And so we're going to, the first one is a situation where the fund actually owns the qualified opportunity zone business property itself. And so what you see here is you see the opportunity zone fund, which is in the green box, typically is a partnership. It doesn't have to be, it could be a corporation, is going to actually own the property. And what I want you to remember about this is that that fund has to hold, as measured by looking at its balance sheet, 90% of its assets in qualified opportunity zone business property. And we don't see this structure very often. And the reason is that you have a 90% test. And what that means is you're limited to having 10% of the assets on that balance sheet being non-qualifying assets. So what we see instead is on the next slide. On the next slide, what you see is a 2-tier structure. And that 2-tier structure shows the opportunity zone fund. Again, it's typically a partnership or an entity, an LLC taxed as a partnership, but it doesn't have to be, it could be a corporation. And it's going to own an interest in what we refer here on the slide as a special purpose entity. In this case, we called it a partnership. And it's going to own an interest in that special purpose entity partnership. And the reason that we typically see this structure is it accommodates the developer sponsors equity and their ability to participate on, for example, a carried interest basis. But it also takes advantage of the fact that the special purpose entity, which we refer to as the Qualified Opportunity Zone Business, or QOZB, is subject to a 70% test, not a 90% test. And that 70% test gives you more room for the balance sheet to qualify than the 90% test does. Just as simple as that. So we see this 2-tier structure very frequently in the marketplace. Now, down at the bottom here, we've got 2 black boxes. We've got one that says third-party sponsor, and then the other we call self-development projects. When I talk to people about opportunity zone funds, I like them to think in terms of maybe 2 different approaches. One is sort of the self-development project. You're going to do it for yourself, and you're going to use the asset in your business. And the other one is you're going to go raise capital from other people and invest that capital in qualified opportunity zone business property. So the structure that you see here is designed to accommodate either of those objectives. So we have a manufacturing business that has identified some property that's in an opportunity zone. They want to go buy that property and build a manufacturing facility on it. Or they want to buy an existing building that's on that property and substantially improve it. They would typically set up a special purpose entity in a structure like this to acquire that asset and do the development work. And then they would lease that asset back to their operating business, as an example, whether it was a building or it was a building and the manufacturing equipment. A third-party sponsor who raises capital from investors is also going to use the same structure. And we see the structure used in both multi-asset projects as well as joint venture projects, which are typically single asset projects. All right, next slide. And I don't think, so let me see. Dominic sent me a text. Can you unmute
Dominic,
him?
We hear you?
He must have, I think he's just a participant. He's not going to be in the list that you see.
I turned on his mic. Dominic, are you able to use your audio? It shows him unmuted.
All right, give him one more 30 seconds to figure this out. You show him as unmuted?
Yeah, it should be unmuted.
Okay. Well, maybe he could send a text in the chat that you can look for. I'll keep us going, and John, you can help me where I need to. So I'm on the accounting firm side. What that means is I don't have a Series 7 license, so I'm not one of the guys that's out there offering investment opportunities to our clients. Dominic has that Series 7 license and is part of our Clifton Larson Allen Wealth Advisory practice. We team together on real estate related projects. So a little bit about CLA Wealth Advisory. First of all, we're a registered investment advisor. And then second of all, we're fairly large. We have just under $10 billion in assets under management. We work with Charles Schwab. To go to the next page. Okay, so before we dive into what we do within CLA Wealth Advisors, I wanted to set the stage here, Alex, and I thought this was good when we rehearsed this. So what you have on here are some screenshots from an opportunity zone map that shows in green the locations that have been designated as opportunity zone tracks. And I've blown up a few of those, and you can see some of these activities that are going on. So in the middle of the page, what you see highlighted is the Amazon Fulfillment Center that's happening out on the west side. And then down on the south side of Albuquerque, you see Mesa del Sol. The entire area is in an opportunity zone. If you look at the Las Lunas area, the Facebook data center is located in an opportunity zone. If you look south towards the border, that whole border area is also designated. Now, the thing about this is that it's worth spending some time looking at where these maps are. Now, remember, I mentioned that they did not update these maps based on the recent census data. That means they're based on old data. And that's partly why they are where they are versus where you might think they would be if you thought about what's happening economically in terms of what's a low income area today. It's because those census tracts were designated based on information that was fairly old. It was on the prior census. So, so with that in mind, let's turn the page. All right, so within CLA, what we have helped our clients do is essentially two different things. We help our clients that are smaller investors that don't have large, 7-figure checks to invest, but have, 5- and 6-figure checks to invest in Opportunity Zone funds. The first one is this Ardent Qualified Opportunity Zone Fund, which is offered through our registered investment advisor platform. You can make an investment into that and defer capital gains in relatively small checks. Then we have JV projects. And JV projects, we've got a couple of examples of those as well. Well, JV projects are for those larger institutional investors, and we refer to it as an institutional investors as an individual and organization with $50 million or more in net worth. These are big boy investors who can do their own due diligence around these JV projects, and we're going to talk about a couple of those. So why don't you go to the next slide? So, and the reason for talking about this is Alex, you wanted to know sort of what we see going on in the marketplace, right? So the first one is this Ardent Qualified Opportunity Zone Fund. This is the retail fund. This is Craig Spencer, who's been raising money and deploying it in real estate for 30 plus years. He set up a fund. He's created a strategy around going out and acquiring projects. And you see 5 of those examples. UNLV student housing, New York City multi-use project. This one, Philadelphia Life Sciences building, New Jersey multifamily. So the fund goes and raises $100 or $200 million from smaller investment checks, and then goes out and invests it and acquires qualifying property. It's going to manage those assets over the 10-year plus time period. That's sort of the retail version of what you see out in the marketplace. Next slide. Then what we have, well, and this is a good example of some of the internal rate of returns that you were interested in, Alex, in talking about that fall within the portfolio of assets that the Ardent Fund has purchased. The first one is the Las Vegas, I think the Las Vegas project. You can see some of, it's a student living facility. It's, designed to take advantage of the location and having a long-term tenant and that's going to create an income stream, that's fairly attractive. Let's go to the next page. Okay, then we move into sort of what we also see, which are the JV investments. And so two of those, one in Nashville, one in Miami, and then the one that's the St. Louis City Foundry was pretty interesting. I'm going to have you click on that link and see if it opens up on your computer, if you can share it. So this one, it was interesting to me because in the city of St. Louis, there was a district called the Foundry District that the city wanted to see rehabilitated. So what you see here is a picture of what it was like, and if you scroll down, you see what it is in the process of being done right now. So this is a good example of what we think was intended by the statute, right? Take capital gain dollars, focus on an area that had low income and was relatively blighted in terms of what it looked like within the community. And
that might be Dominic trying to tune in.
Hey guys, did that finally work?
Yes, you're coming in loud and clear.
Oh, well, I apologize, everyone. I guess I'm one of those people that Southwest Airlines doesn't want to admit they struggled with over the last 5 days. Anyhow, good morning. I'm Dominic Zamora, and my partner, Ben Darwin, has spent, at least the part that I could hear on the phone was extremely accurate, and I don't want to take up a lot more time because I know we have another presenter that wants to share some valuable information with you. But as Ben alluded to, we have spent a great deal of time and energy in learning all things Opportunity Zone. And as it pertains to the capital markets in particular, we've had great success. And as it relates to that, I've spent a fair amount of time in your lovely state, and especially the community of Albuquerque. And I do foresee that it could have a tremendous, robust response to the Opportunity Zone program, much in the way that we have seen in St. Louis, Missouri, as well as Nashville, Tennessee, and many other cities around the country. I do think that what we have seen in the capital market space is there continues to be maybe a
well, so much for technology.
glamorous appeal in some respects as it pertains to Opportunity Zones, because not just because of the tax benefits, but because of what the governors of each of them, it can have great both for community.
Yeah, tech's not on our side today, but appreciate you dropping in, Dominic. You're cutting in and out a little bit. I believe you're talking about sort of the community development opportunity, and I appreciate you sort of going over some of the archetypes we're looking at now. And I think I'll pass it back to Ben if you want to continue with the city factory, or you want to go back to the PowerPoints. Up to you.
Yeah, and Joanna, I wanted this just to be a real segue into what you're doing real time today in New Mexico. So this is your opportunity to jump in here. So please do.
Sounds great. Would you mind pulling up my slide deck? Thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm Johanna Gilligan. I'm the Senior Director of Community Development at Homewise. Homewise is a community development finance institution, a CDFI, so we're a nonprofit lender. that focuses on enabling homeownership as a wealth building strategy for people generally left behind. So most of our work is focused on supporting about 500-600 families and individuals every year to become homeowners. But the community development component is focused on neighborhood scale interventions that have kind of a catalytic impact in terms of the kind of community development that Ben's been referring to, you know, bringing uses and amenities to neighborhoods where there's been disinvestment, and kind of rebuilding commercial buildings that are previously vacant. So in Albuquerque, we're working a lot in the Borellis neighborhood, which is a severely distressed census tract. And in Santa Fe, we're working on new development that's really modeling kind of higher density mixed use infill development that can help bring additional vibrancy and economic opportunities to Santa Fe. So I'm going to talk today about our Opportunity Zone project. I'm really going to get into the details of a project that we have at an infill project we're working on called El Camino Crossing. So you can advance to the next slide, Alex. So similar to Ben's map, this is the zoom in on the Santa Fe opportunity zones. They identified 5 that were included in the map, and ours is 1302. You can advance to the next slide. So this is called the Cyria Road Agua Fria Manufacturing Overlay Zone. This zone is definitely strategically positioned. It's really in the geographic center of the city. It's Cyria Road, Agua Fria to Cerrillos. So within this zone is the Meow Wolf development. It's actually a really interesting area where you have kind of some older established residential on the kind of northeast side, meeting more industrial uses and a lot of interesting new activity like Meow Wolf that's bringing people to this part of town. There's also just been a 65 unit light tech development done called Cyria Art Yards that's about to open. So there's now more residential moving into the area as well. So our project is an 8-acre infill site. It's called El Camino Crossing. This is actually on the former El Moral, so that's part of the name. Comes from that long history of people moving around this area. So we purchased this property in the downturn, and it had a development plan already established. You see this Google Earth image is actually pretty close to where we are right now. We've got 40 single-family homes on the lower end of the map, 13 condos, and we're currently under construction on 2 live-work buildings. So the idea here is that we're really kind of integrating a mix of commercial and residential, and we're really modeling kind of a little tiny slice of walkability. This is just adjacent to the river trail, the bike trail. It's also not far from the Acequia bike trail. So really trying to think about how we can drive kind of, you know, a kind of development that helps with transportation that is not necessarily all car-based and is not designing for everybody having, you know, an acre of land and a big garage. It's really kind of like, how do we maximize the development footprint that we have here? You can advance to the next slide. So just to give everyone a little flavor of the development. So this was the first phase. This was 40 single family homes. They all have accessory dwelling units in the back. So there's kind of income generating potential for the owners, which is cool. The next slide, please. We have a range of types. They're pretty modest scale. This is an all solar development. So everybody has solar on their individual homes, as well as through the condos and the live work. And they're all like rear entry loaded, so they have a really nice street feel. There's lots of there's street parking running all throughout the development. Next slide. We've also got 13 condos that have been built and sold. So the 40 single family units were completed, I think, 2017, all sold really quickly. These 13 condos similarly sold. 20% of everything that we build, we actually think it's at least a minimum of 20% is priced affordably and goes to lower income residents. So we're also really focusing on increasing the affordable housing stock. These were kind of a new product for us. We hadn't really done shared wall development before, but we're really excited about the ability to kind of test this out, and it's gone very well. Next slide. As you can see, we've kind of focused on this contemporary interior, and then every unit has outdoor space. This one has large outdoor space. This is a large kind of second floor patio. Next slide. And then here is a rendering of what's currently under construction, which is 22 work units. Half of these units are actually zoned commercial, so they could be used for production of goods, not just like at-home businesses like therapy businesses or whatever. And as you can see, we're going to have solar all throughout these units as well. Next slide. These are set to be completed end of November, and I think are going to be a really interesting test of kind of how does this live work product play in the Santa Fe market, which is obviously an incredibly tight housing market, but also home to a lot of people who are like entrepreneurs working from home, increasingly so. So we're really curious to see how this plays out. So this is the backdrop for the commercial development component, which is what the Opportunity Zone fund that we established is for. Next slide. So we have 2 commercial buildings on the property with 4 commercial spaces. We have 3 tenants secured, and we're going to spec 1 of the additional commercial units. So the tenant mix is going to be 2 food businesses, restaurants, and then a co-working space. And then the 3rd spec unit, we'll see what happens there. But we're really focused on bringing amenities to the community. This part of town, definitely, there's some burgeoning access to kind of food and beverage establishments, but I think that the 2 that we're working with are already proven models with really entrepreneurs with a great track record. So I think they're going to bring a real urban flavor to this part of town. Part of what Santa Fe struggles with a lot is lacking amenities that help retain younger residents. You know, it's pretty common to know that like most restaurants close at 9. It's really hard to get a drink later. So these 2 concepts are really focused on kind of like serving and attracting the next generation. And obviously co-working is going to be really great for people who maybe are not wanting to work at home all of the time, or people who are part-time living here and don't want to rent spaces full-time. Go ahead and advance to the next slide, Alex. So, you know, I think the big picture for us at Homewise, we have established our own Opportunity Zone fund. It's at a very, very different scale than what you're working on. It's a very small fund, but part of what we have found is that Opportunity Zones are really delivering a lot of value to the investors, but they're often harder to kind of use as a financing tool that's really helping with projects that have a broader variety of kind of social, environmental, and mission impacts. So we really wanted to remain committed on our end to the social and economic impacts we wanted to deliver. So we're really focused exclusively on local businesses and creating, you know, an affordable lease rate for them that allows them to grow and build their businesses. We really want to make sure that we're using green practices in the development of these buildings, and that we're demonstrating the viability of these kind of mixed use infill projects. And we're really services that we know residents in the area are interested in and want to use. So because of that, you can advance to the next slide. We have discussed, you know, with fund advisors, like potentially looking at opportunities on investments, and are not opposed to that. But what we realized was that with double-digit returns to the investors, that would make it harder for us to deliver that kind of value to the entrepreneurs that we're working with. So we established our own fund that is, I think, a direct investment fund. I am not actually the finance person on our team, but what we really wanted to think about was like, what is an opportunity investment fund? What does that look like for people that want to see local impact? So particularly for wealthy individuals in Santa Fe who might have capital gains that they want to invest directly in their community. How can we deliver to them product that is not necessarily as competitive on returns as other funds might be, but is more competitive on impact, and is happening right in their backyard. So we've established a kind of fund structure that delivers a fixed rate of return that minimizes risk to the investor. So we pay that return no matter the performance of the underlying asset. We have a guaranteed buyout at year 10. And the depreciation, we calculate the value of the depreciation as a part of the return we're delivering to the investor. So these are not double-digit returns, but we think this fund represents kind of almost the blend of like how we think about opportunity zone investment with how we think about impact investment, and creating a very niche kind of small ozone fund that's for the kind of investor that might be willing to take lower returns but really wants to see a project happening right in their backyard. So working on designs for these units, but are actively looking for investors. And I have a little write-up on the fund that I'd be happy to share with everyone that delivers a little bit more detail on how it functions. That's it for me.
Awesome. Thank you, Joanna. It sounds like a really innovative model, and it's really exciting to have sort of an opportunity zone fund built around community impact as opposed to sort of just the real estate finance first perspective that's dominated a lot of the narrative. So with that, I think we're going to open it up to some questions. I really appreciate all the panelists' time. We do have a few with a couple minutes left of our webinar. I really appreciate everybody joining and sticking with us today. I know another virtual medium is not what many people want right now, but let me ask a few quick questions. This one's a little bit on the technical side. I'm going to address it to Ben, but what capital gain rates apply to the gains recognized in 2026, and what steps should investors take to plan for those payments?
So the capital gain rate that's going to apply in 2026 is whatever it is at that point in time. So that's a big question today, right? With what Congress is taking up in terms of the potential for modifying capital gains rates. Right now, I think the maximum capital gain rate as proposed by the House Ways and Means Committee was 28.8%. So it will be whatever the rate is in the year you recognize the gain.
And another question, I apologize, made my chat box small here. Can either of you share any examples from successful opportunity zone projects in rural areas? Obviously, the focus has been sort of Albuquerque and Santa Fe and even Las Cruces. What opportunities are there for rural communities, and is it sort of a different sector they should be prioritizing as opposed to maybe residential and obviously commercial housing?
Yeah, if you guys can hear me, I can speak to that.
Yes.
So to this point, most of the rural communities that have had some impact as it pertains to opportunity zone investing really were, I guess, to use going back to last year's election, the ex-urb instead of suburb, using kind of that ex-burb connotation or geography. Those have actually had some appeal. So we are familiar with an investment that took place just outside of Indianapolis that was rural in nature, and similarly to what Joanna's group is doing, was aimed at workforce housing as it pertains to some of those more ex-urban communities. It's out of the ground now. It doesn't exist today. I mean, it does. People are not living there, but it was able to attract quite a bit of capital for its development. So that was exciting. We also know of another project in Colorado Springs, more towards that Fountain, Colorado area, that has also attracted quite a bit of capital, probably more local in nature. And I think that's probably the way to think of how some of those types of opportunity zone investments are getting funded, are mostly by, as Joanna referred to, those folks that want to keep their capital local and want to see the community grow to the greatest degree that it can, and are willing to make those kinds of investments. So that's where we have seen that become relatively successful especially given the size of some of those developments.
Great, thank you. And you had mentioned some of the National Opportunity Zone funds. Do you know whether any of them are specifically targeting investments in New Mexico or looking to sort of co-op with current funds in New Mexico?
We actually do. There's a couple of developers, local developers that we've started to have conversations with. Yeah, there's a couple parts of Albuquerque that have appeal right now. I was mentioning to Alex and Ben and John yesterday that we were in a real-time meeting with a developer, and we were talking about the momentum that we are seeing in Albuquerque relative to the kind of the big money that's coming into town now. And they were going through their own deck and their own kind of modeling, where they have real-time data that feeds their model. And while we were online, it quickly popped into the top 20 of investment markets that particular group is looking at very seriously. In fact, I have a call with them next Monday to talk about how they would like to potentially look at Albuquerque more seriously, because they do see momentum gathering in the marketplace. So it does, Albuquerque does seem to be hitting the map now in terms of outside investors wanting to take a look at the marketplace, and I think that's just going to continue. I think that momentum is real.
Awesome. And just a quick reminder, we're going to be sending out the recording of the presentation out to everybody who registered today, as well as putting it up on our YouTube channel, so that'll be viewable later. And I think we'll conclude with just one final question. This one might be a little bit tough too. Are there any examples of Opportunity Zone programs involved in farming or agriculture, or even value chain development that you know of?
I haven't seen any to this point. Yeah, and Ben, maybe you can speak to this, because usually when it comes to operating businesses, really kind of what, we kind of think about this in the context of, whether it's investments in real estate or investments in operating companies. The Opportunity Zone tax provisions, as originally enacted, seemed like they were trying to encourage both investments in operating businesses and then potentially real estate. It has gotten, in my estimation, I think it's gotten harder to envision how that would work in an operating business context for a lot of no time to go into the weeds here, but that seems to me anyway, where that is, coming to some of the hesitations coming from. Ben, you might elaborate just briefly on that part of it, but that seems to be the hesitation that's at the marketplace right now.
Yeah, I worked with one of our partners up in the Washington State area, Dominic, on sort of scoping out whether this would work for a business that was in the agricultural space that involves packaging agricultural products, and it did seem like it was viable. One of the concerns, ultimately that they had was, and we didn't spend any time really talking about this, but you self-report to the IRS on your activities, but there is a sense that there's going to be continuing pressure to increase the number or the amount of social impact reporting that these Opportunity Zone funds are required to comply with. That's not always attractive to entrepreneurs and closely held business owners. So yeah, it's just harder. Operating companies are just more challenging for any number of different reasons.
Great, thank you for that context and perspective. And I think also the first GAO report isn't out till 2023, so there's a lot to still sort of be uncovered in terms of what the actual impacts ended up being while they've been tracking this program the last 5 years ago. But with that, I think that was a good curveball to finish on. We're very well answered. Thank you, group. A special thank you to Johanna Gilligan, Ben Darwin, and Dominic Zamora for providing our panel today, as well as John Henninger. I really appreciate CLA and Homewise's time, and really kind to the EDD and supportive. So make sure to follow up with them directly with any Opportunity Zone fund opportunities or sort of additional technical assistance that's required. Again, we'll be posting this on YouTube and sending out the presentation the next couple of days. please reach out to me or the EDD or recovery team with any additional questions. I really appreciate everybody's time today. You all have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Alex. Really nice to meet you
Bye-bye.
all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Bye-bye.